This video serves as a brief overview of our recent paper where we talk about link statistics of dislocation network during string hardening, in which we propose some new theories based on dislocation dynamic simulations. My name is Hanfeng Zhai. I'm a co-first author of this paper, and I will briefly go over some of the results and new theories that we propose in this paper. I'd like to start by introduce the concept of dislocation. So what are dislocations? Dislocations are line defects in crystals, as shown in this video from this published paper. As you can see, dislocations are lines that can move under applied loading, whether it be it mechanical loading or electrical loading. And you can kind of imagine if you have a specimen and you apply a mechanical loading and you zoom in of the details of this material, suppose it's a crystal, you'll be able to observe those dislocation lines interact with each other. And you can imagine you can numerically represent those dislocation lines and simulate this process of those lines interacting with each other. And you will be able to predict the overall stress strain curve of this material, of this crystal. And overall, dislocation dynamics controls crystal plasticity. But there's a lack of understanding of the self-interaction of this network, where in other words, we really want to understand this connection between the self-organization or self-interactions of the dislocation network and the overall stress strain curve or the mechanical properties of crystals. And how do we do it? Then we introduce the concept of a dislocation link. What is a link? In the dislocation network, if you zoom in the network, there's this fundamental basic structure called a link marked in red, where basically you have two multi-arm nodes, and if you connect the nodes, that's called a link. And under applied loading, the link can swept. In this previous published paper in Physical Review Letters in 2018, the authors, Sales et al., they showed that under 001 loading orientation, if you collect the links of a dislocation network during this loading process, they are exponentially distributed, or they follow a single exponential distribution. So inspired by the work of Sales et al., we would like to ask a few more questions. But we start with doing a very similar analysis with what they did is you run a simple dislocation dynamic simulation and you show the stress strain curve, and you can select a string window. And as marked here, we show the configuration, dislocation configurations of the beginning and end of the string window. We show that there's not much differences. And then you can collect all the length lengths based on the configurations within this string window. And then we start to ask questions. The simulation is being run on copper, which is phase center cubic, FCC. And we know that FCC has 12 subsystems. And naturally, we're curious that what about the length length distribution on individual subsystems? To answer that question, we will need a lot of different DD simulations on all different loading orientations. So what we did was we try to cover up the whole stereographic triangle where each dot is a DD simulation. And we analyze over 118 loading orientation, which basically means we run 118 dislocation dynamic simulations. And we find there are four typical statistical link length distributions marked in the four colors. And for now, we will go through the results. Before directly showing you the results, a little bit of spoiler alert. The key features of the link distribution follows. There are different link length distributions for active and inactive slip systems. So first of all, we show you the result for a loading orientation near 001 loading orientation. And as you can see, there are 8 active slip systems where you have obviously higher Schmidt factors and leads to a longer tail, which is we call it a double exponential, or a summation of two different single exponentials. And for slip system with obvious lower Schmidt factors, they basically follow a single exponential marked in green, and the double exponential is marked in red. And then we also analyze another typical region closer to 011, which is another corner. And as you can see, for slip systems of higher Schmidt factors, you observe this double exponential distribution of link lengths. And for slip system with lower Schmidt factors, you kind of observe this single exponential distribution. And similarly, for the other corner, a one-on-one loading orientation, for the slip system with higher Schmidt factors, you observe double exponential distribution marked in red. And for slip systems of lower Schmidt factors, you observe a single exponential distribution. And as you can see, among the three corners, you have there are different loading orientations. So there are different Schmidt factors distribution along the 12 slip systems. But you do see this dependence or correlations with Schmidt factors. And among the loading orientation near the center of the geographic triangle, we find that we didn't really observe a very strong evident correlation with a Schmidt factor. And obviously, for some slip systems, you have pretty high Schmidt factor, and some of them have very low, but we don't see an evident double exponential or longer tail of this length distribution. So after seeing those many different length distribution, where we typically mark the double exponential distribution in red and the single one in green, now we want to provide more mathematical foundation or expressions of how do we fit for the different exponential distributions. So for the single exponential distributions, there are no fit. The length distribution follows this expression where Ni is the number of lengths for slip system I, and L bar is the average length for slip system I. It's exponentially distributed, correlating with the length normalized by the average length for the slip system I. For the double exponential distribution, it requires some fitting where you have two populations, the population of the first exponential and the population of the second exponential, or the long tails corresponding to the long lengths. And I marked L bar 1 and L bar 2 in red because in the fitting process, we have two fitting parameters that correlate to the two average lengths for the two populations. And they're defined as it is. So basically, when you do the fitting, there are also two constraints based on physics. So the constraint is first, the summation of the number of lengths of the two populations should be summing up to the overall number of lengths for slip system I. And also, if you also sum up the overall length for the two population, you should also sum up to the total number of lengths times average length, which is the overall length for slip system I. And to better present how is the fitting being done, we also provide a table, and you can also access this table in our paper, where this table shows you that in the fitting process for this loading orientation that very close to 001, we first provide the definition of the 12 slip systems given their plane normal and Berger's vector, and also SP index and corresponding Schmidt factors. You have access to all the detailed fitting parameters for all the 12 slip systems. And those are the active slip systems, and those are inactive ones because there's no fitting. And from the first glance, you can see that the first exponential distribution for the double exponential distribution actually constitute most of the lengths because N1 is actually very close to N, or the total number of lengths. And you can get much more information by directly reading this table from our paper. So one of the important key results that we obtain from all the previous length distribution is those length distribution follow this double exponential for active subsystems, where you can have this sort of long tails, which we mathematically represent as a double exponential. And geometrically, those long tails of length distribution correspond to longer lengths in the dislocation networks. So one of the key questions is what caused this long lengths in a dislocation network? And we try to examine the geometric basis or the physics underneath the longer lengths. And our hypothesis is the applied stress causes long lengths. So we go back to one of the typical results we show at the very beginning, which for a loading orientation that's very close to 001, you have this 8 typical active slip systems, and then for inactive slip systems. And for the active systems, as I previously mentioned, you have a higher Schmidt factors. Physically, it corresponds to a higher resolved shear stress on that slip systems. And for example, for this slip system, you have an or high Schmidt factor, higher stress, and then you have this long tails, which is double exponential. And what we did was we want to examine whether the stress affect the length distribution. We remove the applied stress. Basically, you run your dislocation dynamics simulations to this particular strain, which is the beginning of the strain window we show at the beginning. And then we start to relax the dislocation configuration and then run the DG simulation. And then you run the same number of steps. You collect all the configurations, collect all the link lengths, and then plot the link length distribution. And then we show the result here. As you can see, for all the 12 subsystems, they are relaxed to a single exponential distribution, which is a very strong evidence to support our claim that applied stress on different slip systems cause longer links to bowling out, which cause long tail in the link length distribution. So after running all the 118 dislocation dynamic simulations, we're curious whether we can extract some sort of a global feature of longer links from all the link length distributions. So as we recall from the previous link length distribution, the two curves, whether it's single exponential or double exponential, they're all fitted. And with all the defined fitting parameters from the previous equations, we can first define a thing called the transition length, the transition from the single to double exponential. And this transition length can be derived from the first and second population and the length length of the first and second population. And we can also calculate a fraction, which purely for the second exponential. And this fraction can be calculated as 1 over the number of links per slip system and doing this integral. And based on the fraction of the lengths, you can also calculate the average length lengths for the long links or the long tails of the link length distribution, which we use capitalized lambda 2. And if you follow the algebra, you end up with this expression that can be obtained from a star. And if you're interested in the details, you're feel free to go to our manuscript and read the mathematical derivations. But overall, what do we obtain from those key parameters? We find that the number of the population of the second links or the long tails negatively correlate with the link length of the second population. And moreover, the long tail of the links they typically constitute less than 5% of all the links, as can be seen from this figure. And it's typically 5 to 10 times longer than the system average link length, which can be also observed from the distributions. And they have a obviously clear negative correlation. And then we're also curious because we observe that you have this double exponential distribution, and we hypothesize it's caused by applied stress. And we're curious, why is it double exponential? Do we have an explanation for that? We propose a very simple mathematical model and does not use the simulation data, which is a pure explanation, mathematical explanation for the double exponential, which you can imagine you have some random links, some random distribution of links, and those links will split. And the split probability rate is a constant times the link length proportional to the link length divided by L bar. So you can imagine this is a slip system. Then for that slip system, you have L bar for different slip system. But now if there is no physics, it's pure math, then you can imagine you have some random links, and those links are randomly splitted, and the split probability rate is a constant, is proportional to the link length. So the longer the link, the more likely this link will split. And if you do the integral of this probability rate R over T, then that's the probability. And after a split, this link will grow, and they grow according to a function called the growth function, where the rate of the link growth divided by the link length is this growth function. And I will show you this growth function in the next slide. And this process from A to C, which is called a generalized Poisson process, Poisson process, which we introduce growth on top of the additional existing Poisson process. And we examine two different kinds of growth function. One is just a constant, which equals 3. And the other one is when it's a constant growth function until a transition length or a characteristic length, and then you apply linear. So this growth function is a piecewise linear or a constant linear function. And if you do the numerical demonstration of this generalized Poisson process, just like a simulation, and you just let a bunch of different random links, let them grow and then split and then grow and split and grow, you end up with the two different kinds of link length distribution. One is single exponential distribution, and the other is double exponential. So basically, this simple mathematical model can reproduce the link lengths we observed from DD simulations of single and double exponential. And if we bring back this basic double exponential distribution we obtained from DD simulation, you can also calculate the average velocity of different links during string hardening, which follow this definition as a strength rate divided by link length times Berger's vector times the link length distribution. And then you can plot average lengths of all the links for this particular slip system during string hardening, which is shown in the figure here. And as you can see, longer links, if you plot the average velocity as a function of link length, then for longer links, it has a higher average velocity. Basically, it moves faster, and it can make more connection with the previous hypothesis of the stress-induced bowling out of long links. And we basically conclude that the longer links are highly mobile during string hardening. With that, I would like to conclude that we propose a new geometric theory on link length distribution during string hardening, where we find there are two distinct statistical regimes depending on slip system activity. One is the active slip system that follow a double exponential distribution with a longer tail, which typically correlate with higher Schmidt factors. And there's an inactive slip system that follows a single exponential distribution. And this longer tail arises from stress-induced bowling out longer links. And we have a mathematical model that explains different link length distributions where we propose a generalized Poisson process with growth, explains both single and double exponential distribution that can be mathematically reproduced. And the longer links are highly mobile during string hardening, where they have a higher average velocity. And you're feel free and welcome to directly read more details in our paper by scanning the QR code or go to this link. And thank you very much for listening.